Cool. Happy Saturday, Mackenzie.
Happy Saturday.
So, we're doing this kind of heavy film today called Oppenheimer. I'm sure you've heard of it, about, the scientist who created this atomic weapon that has sort of the underlying message of the film is this could be the thing that eventually destroys the world. Like, he sets
Mm-hmm.
off this chain reaction that could be the doom of mankind. So, with that
Yeah,
sort
no big
of,
deal.
yeah, that sort of heavy topic in mind, what's your biggest whoopsie daisy that you've ever done?
I love that we're likening this to a whoopsie daisy, by the way.
One time I
Uh,
dropped an entire pizza and it fell on the concrete and it was a way that to me that's my biggest whoopsie daisy.
Very comparable, by the way, to setting a chain reaction that implodes the world. Super
Is
similar.
yours deciding to watch 50 something films in a 2 month span every year? How's that going?
Listen, I can tell you at this moment it is. It for sure is. That's my biggest oopsie daisy. Yeah, it's going pretty well actually. I have watched 23 films. I know that doesn't feel like a lot because we're out of 53, but 23 total is a 10 film jump from where I started. So I actually don't think
Okay.
that's bad. So yeah, 30 to go
30
with
to go and you've got 6 weeks left?
little
Four?
over a month. Yeah, 6 weeks ish, I think.
Okay.
So it's on March. We're recording this on February 3rd and it airs March 10th.
Okay.
So I'm making progress, I feel like. Pretty good pacing.
We believe in you.
Thank you. Thank you. Luckily, obviously, we are talking about Oscar stuff. So that helps. I can multitask.
Is there, from the ones that you've watched since the last time we recorded, is there one specific picture that we're not talking about where you like think people should go watch it before the Oscars for sure?
Yeah, well, there's a few to be honest that I think are really good. I think some of them, like to your point, I think some of them we will end up talking about just based on the
Hmm.
way these polls are going. But I will also say one that I don't think we'll probably get to just because of the way I'm seeing people vote is The Zone of Interest is
Hmm.
really, really good. It's really heavy. It's also a heavy one, which again, we've talked about this on the pod before. Like Oscar movies are just heavy by default. I don't know why that is. But anyway, it's very, very powerful film and it's really uniquely done. It's actually one that I hope we do talk about on the pod at some point for sure. It's really good.
All right, all right. Yeah, I know the premise on that one sounded pretty dark, and I
Yes.
hadn't really heard much about it. But I do see a handful of people voting for it in our
Mm-hmm.
Instagram polls. We drink and we watch things. So eventually, I think I will get around to it. We'll see if I get there in time for the Oscars. But
I think so. And I have some hot takes on ones not to recommend. So we'll maybe have a separate ep about that as well.
all right, well, let's get to it.
Welcome back to We Drink and We Watch Things. I'm Mackenzie.
I'm Lemar.
He's back. We let him come back this time. And today we're talking about Oppenheimer as part of our Oscars February. We need a better name than that, by the way.
You can't really
But
push those words together.
I know, I feel
I've
like
tried every combination.
and we're just out. So anyway, Oscars Feb, I don't know, whatever. But this is our best actor conversation. We, as you all may or may not know, polled the class to see which one they
Mhm.
wanted to talk about. And this one won our best actor one. We had talked about a couple others already, and we will be talking about some more. But yeah, Oppenheimer came out on top for Cillian Murphy was playing Mr. Oppenheimer. And we'll get into all that. But for now, what are we drinking?
Well, I am drinking Oppenheimer's martini, and this is historical. Like, this is actually the way that he preferred to drink them. I do think that they have them in the film as well. It's a pretty standard martini, no olives, just, gin and vermouth, very heavy on the
Mm-hmm.
gin, but it has a lime and honey rim on it. So it adds a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of sweetness and a little bit of bite with the lime. And yeah, it's pretty delicious. So Oppenheimer liked to drink them. Good enough for him, good enough for me. How about you?
I'm doing the same. I know you shared it with me, but I also looked it up because I was like, well, what should I do? Should I do something different? Should I do the same? And same thing. I just, really liked the historical aspect of it, that this is what he drank, and you see him make it in the film, which is really
Mhm.
fun. So, and I'm not a huge gin drinker, to be totally transparent, so I made a teeny
No.
tiny one, and I definitely did not follow his ratio, which is apparently insane. So
It's 4 ounces of gin to a tiny little splash of vermouth, so you're just basically having 4 shots of gin in one drink. It's great.
yeah, bananas. I read something, it was like 16-to-1 ratio is what it works out to be, of like how much the splash is. Terrible. Anyway, so yeah, we're gonna try to stay sober through this one for you guys. But
Do our
yeah,
best. No
cheers.
promises.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
Ooh, yeah, see, gin, not my drink,
Mhm.
not my fave. I'm gonna
The
power through
honey
though.
does so I feel like honey is always a natural mixer for gin, with, like, bee's knees and whatnot, so I feel like the honey does help the gin to not burn your throat quite as much on the way down.
Yeah, and I like the lime as well. I will say it does help. But yeah, the core of the gin and the vermouth are just not my vibe. I feel like you got to do, I don't know, something fruity, really,
Yeah.
with gin for me to like it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Worth a shot for sure. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
We're gonna do for you guys, our kind of our, I guess, our format, our somewhat typical format of trying to not give you too many spoilers. So we want to go through, the basics. We'll share the basics of, who did the things and wrote the things and performed the things. And then we'll get into our spoiler section where we will go to town. Don't worry,
Yeah.
we will warn you. It'll be fine. Uh, but with all that being said, let's do the basics. I think everybody knows who directed this, but in case you didn't, Christopher Nolan is back with another gem, I'd say. Like, does he
Yeah.
make bad movies? I just feel like not really.
Everything no, I mean, I think I'm a fan of pretty much everything he's done. I like some better than other. Do you have a favorite Nolan? Like, a go-to?
I it's hard to pick a favorite. I think I have a couple contenders, but if I absolutely had to pick a favorite, it would probably be Inception.
Okay,
Like,
I'm glad that you picked one because you tried to go the traditional Mackenzie route
oh
of
my
like,
god.
"Oh, well, I can't pick one," but if I had I'm glad that you finished with, "If I had to, I would go with this one." You answered the question. Okay, why
Okay, but
Inception?
also Dark Knight Rises. All right. Yeah. I had
Really?
to
Dark Knight
I
Rises,
had
the
to be
3rd
true
one?
to I had to be true to myself. No, no, I'm kidding. Dark Knight.
Okay.
I'm just being an ass. I
Okay.
no, I it would be hard to pick a like narrow
Actually, you
down
know
to
what?
that second
In
one.
in that case, I'll give you 2. You can take the Dark Knight, it's like bargain bin, like, they just
Oh my
package it
god,
with
throw that one
Inception,
in.
like, "You get these 2 DVDs for $10." Yeah, nobody's buying Dark Knight Rises. I apologize to any fans of Dark Knight Rises out there, but
I liked it, but it's definitely Dark Knight. Dark Knight's definitely the better
yeah,
one for
yeah.
sure. Anyway, but we could talk about Christopher Nolan all day because he just does incredible films over and over. Even his quote unquote weakest films are not weak,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
I'm super excited to do this one about him because I think it is, no pun intended, kind of an opus for him.
Mhm.
It's this huge, not just long, but huge undertaking to do this film, I think. So we'll get into more of that, but definitely excited to see this one come out for him. He also, of course, wrote it, as
Yep.
he is wont to do. He does that with most of his films, and then also partners with people when he does his writing sometimes, but not 100% of the time. He In this case, he did not partner with, for example, his brother often a writing partner of his.
Alright.
The folks that are credited here, and I don't know if it's just kind of like a courtesy credit or how involved they actually were, but the writers that are co-credited with him here are Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin, who are actually the authors of the book on which this is based. So
Yep.
if you didn't already know, this is based on a book. It's a biography, of course, about Oppenheimer, but it's entitled American Prometheus: The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer, which I think pretty much sums up like this film and also his life. you
Yeah.
know,
You know me, Mackenzie, we've had this discussion a few times on the podcast. I'm kind of an idiot. So when it comes to history and things like that, I did not know. I knew who Oppenheimer was, but when this
Sure.
movie was announced, I didn't know this entire backstory of how he was like excommunicated, sort of came back eventually. Like, not to spoil anything, I mean, it's a historical account, but like, I had no idea all the stuff that was tied
Yeah.
into his life, the political things that tied into it, the scientific things. And so seeing that play out on screen was so much more interesting than I thought it would. And I thought this was going to be not a war movie, but I thought it was going to be a race to build a bomb. Like that was going to be the
Yeah,
plot.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it goes into so many other layers than that. That is like not the least important thing in the movie, but I feel like there are two or three storylines that are more important than the actual bomb itself.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, we'll get into the exact why and how, but I would say that is definitely a secondary storyline. And it is I think maybe really easy to go make a race to the bomb movie. And that's not what he did. He got
Right.
really in depth with it. Again, I think we have to credit the source material, right? Like, and I'm sure that's why these folks are co-credited. Did you know it took them 25 years to write the book? Like, it is bananas for a biography. That's
That's
just
like
how
George R. R. Martin levels of commitment to your
exactly.
craft.
Winds of Winter's never coming out, guys. Just get it,
Sorry,
just so
y'all.
you know.
I
Uh,
saw a tweet that was like, at this point, I'm not afraid. Everyone's afraid of George R. R. Martin dying before he finishes the Thrones series or Song of Ice and Fire. But it's like at this point, I'm more concerned about me dying before he finishes
For
the
sure.
series.
For sure. Yeah. It's just,
Uh,
I've come to a place of acceptance that it's not going to happen, to be honest. But, you know, listen, I get it. How do you live up to those expectations? And that also, honestly, tying it back to this is probably why it took these folks so long, right? Like, this is a
mm-hmm.
really intense story to have to tell about, again, his life, but also the crux of the matter, which is that he is the architect of, this bomb, one of, but the architect of this bomb that literally changed the world. So, to treat that subject matter with, sincere deference and care is not surprising to me that it would take a really long time. But I think
Yeah.
obviously they did a really good job. I actually haven't read the book, the source material. I've read a lot about this topic, but I haven't read the original book. But I hear that it's very good, like very well done, very
Okay.
comprehensive. And I've also heard that this adaptation of the content in the book is pretty comprehensive and pretty well done. And I think it simplifies it too. We'll talk about the politics of it all a little bit, but honestly, the politics of it all, of what's going on at this time in his life and throughout his life, is really complicated. And I think the film does a good job of clarifying some of those things for us that would otherwise be hard to follow, for sure.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, I know we're going to get into the cast first, but one thing that I
mhm,
do want to call out, and this is not a spoiler, but the way this is structured
mm,
with sort of, we have multiple storylines or multiple timelines happening, but
mhm,
I will get into like the way that they tell that. But I did find that the first time through, it was a little overwhelming trying to figure out when different things were happening. But I think
mhm.
on rewatch, I really appreciate the structure because it does help you to latch on to all these conflicts throughout his life and sort of the parallels between himself and Strauss. And yeah, I dig that a lot. So I'm sure we'll dig more into that in a minute.
Yeah, I think it does provide some real clarity of who he is at those varying moments, right? Like the way in which he performs each of those different phases is quite different because he has been changed by this experience as well. So yeah, I think you can see the difference in all those incongruous moments that go snap in and out, right? So, but yeah, to your point, let's go through the cast really quick. Incredible cast. I think we've alluded to
Yeah.
the incredible performance here by Cillian Murphy. It's
Yeah.
on, he's the eponymous central figure, Robert Oppenheimer. So he's, the central driving force behind the story. And he, I think, maintains your attention the entire time in that way, right? And that's not that easy to do, to hold that power over the film throughout. And I think he really does. So, if you don't know Cillian Murphy, he's been in a ton of things.
This is his sixth Christopher Nolan film.
I was going to say, he's in like everything that Christopher Nolan does, if
But
you,
the first one where he's been cast as the lead, he's been sort of like,
mm-hmm,
he was the villain in Batman Begins, and he's made
mm-hmm.
little appearances in Dunkirk and whatnot. But this is the first one where he carries the entire film. So it's interesting. We're doing this back to back with Killers of the Flower Moon next week, and it's interesting to see directors latching onto their favorite actors. And in Killers, you get Scorsese using both DiCaprio and De Niro, which has been sort of his go-tos for years. So it's interesting to
Mm-hmm.
see how Nolan has sort of latched on to Cillian Murphy and finally gives him a chance to shine brighter than he has before here.
I think so. And he also, I mean, he's always incredible no matter how small his role, right? Like he
Mm-hmm.
makes smaller appearances in some of other Christopher Nolan stuff, including Inception, but it's a very impactful character, impactful moment. And I think that's true of him in everything that he does. But they found I think the right central role for him. And I actually love that about Christopher Nolan in general as well, where he kind of has this cast of characters that he
Mhm.
knows that he can use in these different stories. And of course he peppers in some other folks, but it's almost like having that core company, like a theater company does, for example. And he uses those same characters over and over, and he uses them to great effect. And this is, yeah, again, I think the right central role for Cillian Murphy. So obviously, it resulted in an Oscar nom for him, so he did a great job. We also have a few other incredible cast members. This is quite the ensemble, even though we spend most of our time, of course, with him. But we have Emily Blunt as his wife, Kitty, and Matt Damon as Leslie Groves, who's, for context, he's the Army Corps of Engineer director of the Manhattan Project. So he's pretty key. He's with us a lot throughout. His wife, Kitty, is also really important to us in the story as well. But you definitely get the sense that we're in the making of the bomb is the driving force of the story. So we spend the most time with those folks. But
Yeah.
uh,
Kitty, we're going to dig into how awesome she is because I
mhm.
love her character throughout this. I also wanted to note that apparently Matt Damon was trying to take a break from acting prior to this film
Yeah.
being made. His wife had encouraged him of just like take a little break. I don't know how long it was going to be, but just, take a year off or something like that. And the only caveat he gave her was, look, but if Christopher Nolan calls me for anything, I can't take this break. And sure enough, I think within a month or two, that's what happened, and he's out there making another movie with Christopher Nolan, and he's really good in this as well.
He is really good in this, and he gets one of the few moments of levity in this whole thing, and I love how he
Hmm.
delivers it so well. But yeah, he does an incredible job. I don't think we really need to speak to what Emily Blunt and Matt Damon have done. Like, you guys have seen them all over everywhere. They're incredible
Yeah.
actors. Same thing with our next appearance by Robert Downey Jr. He plays Lewis Strauss, who is one of the originating members of the Atomic Energy Commission. Again, historically accurate, interesting guy. Truly is, kind of a nemesis of Oppenheimer for a lot of reasons, as we see in the film, and others that we don't. But it's a very different turn, I think, for Robert Downey Jr. And he actually also
Yep.
is nominated as a best supporting actor here as well. And I think it's for that reason. It's not an Iron Man, you know what I mean? It's not a Tony Stark character. It's a very different character.
It reminds, and this is not the same situation, but it reminds me of, when we were kids and we watched Jim Carrey do all these comedic roles, and then he started
Mhm.
to take on more dramatic things, and it's like, oh, I can't believe he did that. Or Robin Williams. I know Robert
Mhm.
Downey Jr. is a very different actor than those folks, but after seeing him, for the past 2 decades play very charismatic and
Mhm.
confident sort of playboy characters outside of Tony Stark, all his
Right.
roles have been sort of that vibe. To see him play insecure, chip on his shoulder, trying to sort of downplay his own heritage and make steps in America, but also be this sort of conniving behind closed doors character. It's a well earned nomination considering what we've seen him do in the past.
Yeah, 100%. We'll dig into it more like you said, but I think he gives us a really radically different performance, and I think it's rooted in his interpretation of this real guy, right? And I think it's an
Hmm.
interesting take because not everyone has the same perception of this particular person. So I really enjoyed, yeah, watching how he performed it. But we also have a really killer performance by Florence Pugh, who, even though again is a
Hmm.
very small character here, she's a notable one and I think she's that actress, right? Like, she's that actress who steals every scene that she's in. I think we
Hmm.
have seen that from everything that she's done, not least of which, like, she just was in the Black Widow for Marvel, but you wouldn't have expected her to steal the show in that film. And I
I
know
don't
it's a
remember much about that movie, but I remember Florence Pugh. I don't
right.
remember enjoying that film, but
That's what I'm saying. Like, a lot of people didn't like that movie, but
yeah,
universally she was the thing that you liked,
she
right?
was the
Like,
highlight. Yeah.
she can make something that people don't like really good, is, yeah, definitely what I'm saying. So she does an incredible job here.
Hmm.
This is not a lighthearted role for her at all. It's also a very sad turn of this person she plays, Jean Tatlock, who was one of the relationships in Oppenheimer's life, both in and out of his marriage. We'll get into that. But she is a really, really sad figure. And I think this is, again, an interesting turn for Florence Pugh as well. It's a very different role for her, too. And then we also have a bunch of other kind of cameo type figures that I won't get into, but the last one I will say because I think it's such an impactful scene is Jason Clarke, who plays Roger Robb. He's the prosecutor of the security clearance hearing
Yeah.
of
He's
Oppenheimer,
so
and
hateable.
so fucking hateable. He does such a great job, and
Yeah.
he's one of those, I think, truly like a character actor who plugs in a lot of different places, and he always just does it so seamlessly. You almost don't notice
Mhm.
that he's there, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, he blends so perfectly into those characters, and yeah, this was one of them. He did a really good job of making me want to punch him in the fucking face. So good
Yeah,
work.
it's interesting that we end up with almost two antagonists in this, and he's definitely
Hmm.
one of them, one of just the one who's on screen for the most and the one that you probably hate the most by the end. But I wanted to call out when you said we have this huge cast of characters, apparently a lot of folks who agreed to do this, really they just wanted to work with Nolan. And it was a lot of
Hmm.
first-time actors working with him, and Nolan also felt it was important to sort of cast more recognizable faces to these roles
Hmm.
because it's such a massive cast of
It
characters, and
is.
you have scientists coming in and the different people from different countries, and you're
Hmm.
trying to keep track of all this, and it's moving at such a quick pace that he thought it was important. So just to list off a few, you've got, if you haven't seen this for some reason, you got Josh Hartnett, Kenneth Branagh, Rami Malek, Jack Quaid, Casey Affleck, fucking Gary Oldman shows up. So,
Hmm.
and then I think probably the most important one, which is crazy to me, we get Albert Einstein playing himself, I think, in his first motion picture appearance. And that was really cool. But yeah, all that to say, the cast, and I apologize that I don't know offhand the guy who plays Albert Einstein because now I feel bad about that joke. But he's also very good, and it's crazy that all these actors would just go out of their way to take these small single or two scene roles just to work with
Hmm.
Christopher Nolan.
And I mean, that was true for even like Florence has a little bit more than two scenes, but she has a relatively small showing here. And she felt the same way. She told a story during, I guess, the press tour and was just saying, like, he called me and apologized for the size of the role. And she was
Huh.
like, "Are you kidding me? Like, don't, I'll do, put me in the back, make me, I think she said, like, make me, I don't care if I'm a floor lamp, like, I'll be in the movie." So there's a lot of respect in the industry of him and his filmmaking. He's just really truly an incredible filmmaker, and he's just so precise in the way that he develops his films, with such commitment. They're truly really long-term detailed projects that kind of overtake his life, right? And for the record, it's Tom Conti who plays
I was
Albert
literally
Einstein's.
Googling it on my phone as well.
Were
So I'm
you?
glad. Thank you for calling it out. I was going to say two
I'm
things. Shout out Tom Conti. Second thing, if you guys, there's honey, as I said, on the rim of my drink. So if you guys hear me throughout today's podcast, like licking my fingers, I apologize. I can't move away from this microphone. So you're welcome to some of you.
It's true. It is an odd rim, I'm not gonna lie, but it works, I'll take it. So anyway, all that to say, awesome ensemble cast. Yeah, lots of great cameos by some incredible folks. And I do think it's a good move, yeah, to have these people who are recognizable because there is truly just really too much to keep track of as far as who is who. So I thought
And
that was a really, really good tool for sure.
agreed. And I'm going to do my best not to do this throughout the entire episode today. But as I said, we're doing this back to back, Killers of the Flower Moon. So I watched both
Mm-hmm.
this week. And next week, you guys will get to hear me sort of critique some things about Killers of the Flower Moon. And one
Mm-hmm.
of them was it's a similar thing, massive cast, long movie. And I
Mm-hmm.
think by actually casting a lot of folks that weren't recognizable as they were in this, it makes some of that film very hard to follow of when
Yes.
they're back referencing different characters. In this, you've got scientists
Mm-hmm.
in the first 45 minutes of the film making an appearance in hour one, hour two, coming back around in sort of the trial and whatnot, or hearing. And it's important that we're able to connect all the dots there. And I think that Nolan's method here of casting, as we spoke about, really helps you to follow that plot.
I agree. Yeah, I think there are some notable comparisons between these two films, and
Yeah.
we'll probably continue to make them, hopefully without any spoiler f ups. We'll do our best. But really quick, I want to also call out the nominations for this film.
Yes.
13 Oscar noms. 13. fucking Oscar noms.
Okay.
And so it was Best Picture, Directing, Supporting Actress, Actor, Supporting Actor, Adapted Screenplay, Cinematography, Film Editing, Production Design, Costume Design, Original Score, Makeup and Hair, and Best Sound, which I want to talk about the Best Sound piece for all kinds of reasons.
Hell
But
yeah.
point is, basically everyone is saying this is the best freaking movie we've seen. Let's nominate it for everything. And
Yeah.
notably, it won at the Globes for Best Actor, Supporting Actor, Drama, Director, Score. So not everything it was nominated for here, but it won a lot. It won a lot.
And I think that's because it just speaks to how well-rounded this film is, because
Mm-hmm.
not a, it's a period piece, right, in a way, so they have to sort of have those components of making things look accurate to the time period. You have to
Mm-hmm.
have the costuming, the vehicles, all that stuff. We talked about that with the holdovers, like having that on point.
Mm-hmm.
You also have incredible performances, you have an incredible story, you have incredible visual effects. It's just this really, really well-rounded film that does a bunch of shit, and it does all of it really, really well.
And I think that's true of Christopher Nolan in general. I mean, he makes good films. He just does, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even again, his worst films have a real quality to them and being well done. But this is maybe the one that feels, yeah, the most well rounded, probably. And it showed in the box office as well, right? Like we obviously famously, you all I'm sure have heard of the Barbenheimer phenomenon that occurred when this movie came out, and it drove both of them to incredible success. But
Yeah.
they are at just shy of $1 billion, unlike the Barbie movie, but 958 million, but against $100 million budget, which is, of course, sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But if you think about
Mm-hmm.
what they did with this film in a short period of time, that's, I mean, and what it made, it's obviously a huge box office success. So it resonated with people for sure.
Yeah, yeah. What else do you, I guess, before we get into big time spoiler territory, what can we say about this film? One thing that I guess I want to mention is sort of the breakneck pace of it, because
Hmm.
you said almost $1 billion, and for a film that is 3 hours long, if it's not a Marvel movie, that's
It
shocking
just
to me. That
goes.
yeah,
Yeah.
it just go 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 go, and I think that's probably what led to some of the box office success. Is yeah, it doesn't feel
It
three
doesn't feel that
hours
long.
long.
Yeah.
There
It
are so few quiet moments in this where there's not the music, to your point, in the background. The score is almost constant throughout the film. We'll get into that later, but it's this just harrowing pace of there's not downtime, there's not a lot of silence. It segues from one scene
Mhm.
right into the next, no hesitation, and it just powers and like steamrolls you for the 2 hours and 50 something minutes.
Yeah, I think, I wonder how much of that translates from the production itself, because that's actually something that Cillian Murphy called out specifically of. He said that the pace of this filming process was
Mm-hmm.
insane. He called it insane, and it actually was. It was trimmed quite a bit. It had been planned, pre-production planning had, principal photography shooting for 85 days, and they ended up cutting it down to 55 days. Like,
Oh.
that is a huge trim of the schedule, and it was purely budget. It was, we can't do this with $100 million in this length of time. We've got to trim the fat. And he just said, like, he's in almost everything, as you know. He's in almost every single
Mm-hmm.
moment, scene, everything. And so he was like, this was just an insane filming process. And I wonder how much of that translates to the edit. Was that the feel of the set, the feel of the story, because that was also the way that it was shot. I think that would be a really interesting question for Mr. Nolan, obviously, but I agree with you. The pacing is incredible.
Well, tacking onto that and just piggybacking, is this movie was not storyboarded in pre-production at all. So they
Hmm.
didn't even plan out what the shots were gonna. They just sort of got on set and followed their hearts, for lack of a
And
better
just did it.
term, and made magic. Yeah.
I think they were able to plan the production in a way that's surprising for not having storyboarded it. Like it's
Hmm.
all very efficient for not having storyboarded it. So again, I think it just speaks to his skill set as a director. But yeah, a couple fun nuggets for you guys before we get into spoilers. That, if you haven't seen it, this is the first IMAX film to be done in black and white. And for parts
Huh.
of that film was actually developed. The IMAX black and white film was developed for this film, and it is shot on IMAX 65 millimeter and other 65 millimeter large format film. So it's intended to be seen in this size, right? It is intended to be viewed in this large format. And I think it's cool that, yet again, Nolan's breaking ground with even just the film that he used for the entire process. So that's just I think a fun production nugget as well. And we'll get into some more deets later on about various choices Nolan made throughout, but I think that's a fun one. But before we send you non-spoiler people on your way, Lemar, what's your takeaway? I mean, what's your review? Obviously, it sounds like you want people to go see it.
Yeah, if you haven't seen this, you need to watch it. Again, it might seem like a commitment to sit, but it does not feel like you're sitting through a 3-hour film. I think it is a visual experience. It's one that I would encourage. It's going to be hard to sit there and be on your phone in your living room while you watch this. It's
Right.
very, there are quieter moments, but it is just driven from beginning to end with
Mm-hmm.
various conflicts and uncomfortable conversations. And I think I was also surprised to what I said earlier of the way the film plays out. I mean, everyone knows historically what actually ends up happening, but the big event that you think will be the climax of the movie is a little over halfway in. And then the rest of it is sort of following what we spoke about earlier of the rest of this guy's life. People
Mm-hmm.
continued living, and there were a lot of complications because of this event. So I think overall, just watch the damn movie if you haven't yet. I don't think we're going to be spoiling a shit ton of stuff about it in the spoiler section. We're just going to get into the nitty gritty. But
Mm-hmm.
as far as like ratings go, I'm not going to give it anything less than a 9. I think for me personally, because of the length, I don't think this is something that I'm going to watch a bunch more times in my life. Maybe I'll give it 1 or 2 more goes, but I'd say like a 9 on a personal
Mm-hmm.
level. I think if I'm rating it objectively from just if I was in the academy or whatever, it'd be a 10. I don't think there's very little to find wrong with it.
Right, right. Just on its face, like there's
Right.
very few flaws. I agree. I think it's a really, really great film. My only, point deduction again, yeah, would be length. But even then, when I say that, I wonder what you would cut, because
Hmm.
again, to your point, pacing, it's still telling relevant parts of the story. Every moment feels important. Every
Yeah.
moment of this film feels important, even the slower moments, the pauses. Because while this thing does have this incredible pacing, there are these moments of pause. There are these moments of really internal struggle that you get to view from his lens
Hmm.
for some really length of time that is surprising. But I wouldn't cut them either. I can't think of ones that I would cut. So yeah, I was hovering at like an 8.5 or a 9. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's definitely in that range. Cool.
Nice.
Well, obviously, we love this movie. Go watch it. And if you
Hmm.
have already seen it, stick around. But if you haven't, turn around. Don't drown. It's spoiler
Spoiler
time.
time.
All right. Well, let's dig into it, man. I'm down to just, again, to your point, I don't think we're gonna give away too much. Just even in the interest of
Hmm.
time, we're not gonna go through it point by point. It's also genuinely, guys, again, very hard to follow. Linearly, at least
Yeah.
you're just jumping around because of these snapshots of his life at different points, and so I think it hard
Hmm.
makes it hard to go plot point anyway. But I like that they do cover it that way, and I want to tap into something you just said a second ago was, life goes on. There's this
Hmm.
momentous climactic occasion that has again literally changed the course of humankind, and that cannot be overstated, right?
Hmm.
But this is also just a man who had to go on living afterward, right?
Yep.
And how that impacts you mentally beyond the thing that you just did, but to have to go on living with the repercussions of what you have done, with the what that has science has opened the door to. Like this is a really it's frankly to me very incredible that he was able to go on living. I don't say that lightly because I understand what that means, but how hard must it have been truly to go on living after something like this? So yeah, I think to your point, they deal with so much more in the back half of
Hmm.
that part, the
Hmm.
human experience of it.
Yeah, it's the structure itself of how they weave together these different timelines. And I think again, the first time I saw it, it was a little disorienting. I couldn't really
Mhm.
understand why some scenes were in black and white, and then you sort of figure out, an hour into the movie, oh, okay, so when we're seeing it from Strauss's point of view, we're getting these black and white scenes of how Strauss is interpreting. Because even at the end, we get the color version of the Einstein interaction. So
Mhm.
if it's in black and white, you're getting his perspective, and how much of it is interpretation of what he hears, I'm not really sure. I don't know if that's even worth digging into, but it's cool that you get that, and then you get the color sequences with Oppenheimer himself, but then you also get multiple timelines of that, because you're getting the lead up to the bomb being constructed and the fallout from that. And that's not the best term to use, but like the literal fallout of just, what ends up happening with him in the scientific community and whatnot. But you get also the sort of the middle future where it's him at the hearing and him being interrogated and sort of them questioning all these things. And what you said, if he had to keep on living with this thing that he had done, and he sort of questioned the morality of it and like, what have I really done? And then to be double questioned by the country that you helped to construct this, to ensure that this would remain sort of this superpower, and we would be at the forefront of like, nobody fuck with us, we have the
Yeah.
strongest weapons in the world, you just saved our asses. And then to be sort of pariah, like made a pariah and sent out because of that, it's just crazy to think about.
I mean, this really is the beginning of what we understand to be the peak of the arms races, the various
Mm-hmm.
arms races that humanity has always had, right? I mean, since the dawn of humanity and history and war, we're always coming up with more creative and efficient ways to kill each other. And how horrifying is that, right? And this is like the true climax of that as a people. And he is in the thick of that. And you are seeing him contend with that. And you're seeing us as a government, the way that we historically handled that power and that knowledge and that, that door that we were opening. And it's, it leads directly into, things like the doomsday clock of that
Mm-hmm.
was a very real fear, because this power just kept getting bigger and bigger and more dangerous. And what we see him really grapple with in this film is, you can't make this science or this bomb theoretically. You're making it for real. And then it is no longer a theory. It is no longer an abstract. It is a real tool that he saw we would always find a reason to use. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing that he really contended with. And I think is really the moral center of this film, of him contending with, beginning with this naivety almost of, if we do this, if we develop this, then we're going to prevent further development by the Soviets or even by us, because the risk will be too great. Everyone will be too afraid of the
Right.
fallout, to your point. But that's not what happens. And he learns, I think, a lot about humanity as a result that he, I think, was unprepared for that
Yeah.
reality, and then has to deal with it. And I mean, yeah, how do you respond to that in a moment where you've already set yourself on this path, you know?
Yeah, I think it's Borgman that delivers that line near the end where he says, "We've built the biggest bomb in the world. Like, no, what's going to happen now?" And he says, "Until somebody builds a bigger one."
Until somebody
That's
builds a
pretty
bigger
much what
one.
we've been on. And sometimes I think we forget the world that we live in. There was a president who shall not be named, and when those 4 years were, I was acutely more aware of, oh, nuclear war could happen at any time.
Any
Still,
fucking minute.
we feel like we're in this stalemate, and it is, the doomsday clock that you mentioned and all that. It's very scary. And so seeing the moral quandary that went into the construction of this weapon and whatnot, definitely very captivating.
And I think it's important to note that he really does not only grapple with this, but it's captured in this film a bit, but I don't know how. And I don't mean this as a criticism. I just mean, I don't think we delve deep into the fact that he spends the rest of his life trying to slow this type of progress, try to
Mm-hmm.
slow this
Mm-hmm.
type of development. He has seen again that we will not restrain ourselves from using something like this. And a huge part of his feud with Strauss, both in and out of the film, is that Strauss wants to keep going, wants to keep developing this technology, and he sits in a very powerful position to make that happen. And and meanwhile Oppenheimer is actively fighting against the development of the hydrogen bomb and is saying, no, like we can't keep, that's 1,000 times stronger than the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And they want to
Oh,
just keep going with it. And he looks
yeah.
at the devastation of that and goes, and we see that moment in this film. And that's the thing that I just think is done so viscerally in this film. Like that moment of understanding what they have done,
Mhm.
understanding the part he's played in the murder of innocent people to a previously yet untapped scale, to understand that he did that. And that moment is so visceral, I think, in this film. And he says the famous line of, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. And
Yeah,
how could you
which
not
to
feel that way?
yeah, but to lighten the mood a little bit, it was fun to learn that he was having sex with this girl, and that's where he discovered that quote. She's like, "Hey, let me take a break from sex, check out your bookshelf real quick, judge you, and then make you read." And it just so happened. Like he must have told that was a great bar story for him, I bet. But
I just want that to be really how he found it. You know what I mean? Like I just want that to be the true story. I
yeah.
don't know that it is or not, but I'm going to take it. I'm going to just
Yeah.
run with it.
Yeah. It's a tall tale like Paul Bunyan. But anyway, I wanted to spin off of what you said because we spoke in the spoiler free section about sort of the sound in this, the music, the score, and
Mhm.
yeah, I was tracking it this time of I want to say 90 to 95% of this film has the score in the background of like every scene. It's just like it's not a music video, but it is like a gripping ride set to this
Mhm.
sort of backing track. The only couple of times where we really don't have any sound in the background are to your point of saying, that visceral moment where he realizes what he's done. There's two. There's when they set off the test bomb and it goes
Mhm.
the film is actually silent for about 60 or 90 seconds and all you hear is
Completely silent.
yeah,
I don't think that can be overstated. It
yeah.
was, you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
again, that's an hour and 45 minutes into the film. So you've been at
yeah,
this breakneck pace, and then to finally have the moment where this bomb is going off for the first time and everything goes
yeah.
quiet, and you just hear him breathing, like taking it in, and that's all you get.
I get
That moment
chills. I
stuck
get
with me.
chills just talking about it.
Yeah. And the second one is when he's giving the speech to celebrate, for lack of a better term,
Oh
the
god, that
bombing
scene.
in Japan. And I forgot what happened there
Mm.
until it happened again, and the scream when it goes quiet and you hear the ladies scream, I that's blood curdle. Like I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it.
Mhm.
But then for him to he's sort of still continuing to deliver his speech, but you see the audience cheering, but there's no sound coming out of their mouths.
Mhm.
You see the lights of that, and that's another thing that's done really well in this, of
Mhm.
just the lighting and whatnot of the theoretical explosions going off in that room. You see the one woman whose face is peeling essentially, and that is,
Mhm.
not so fun fact, but interesting fact, that's actually Christopher Nolan's daughter in that
Yep.
scene. And
Yep.
he said something about how
He did that
when
on
you're
purpose.
building, yeah, he said, when you're building this type of thing that can cause destruction, you have to think about the fact that it can be used against the ones you love. So maybe that was
Mhm.
me, recognizing that in a way.
Right. Right. And I think, I mean, plus 10 to all of that, number 1. Number 2, I think there's a couple things to note is that I think this is Nolan's best use of sound. And I
Mhm.
say that specifically because of these scenes, but also because historically, if you are a Christopher Nolan fan, you know that there's a lot of contention with his use of sound, actually. A lot of people struggle with the way that he handles sound and sound editing in his films.
Hmm.
Many people complain you can't hear dialogue in a lot of his films. Dunkirk, for example, I saw that in theaters and it was unhearable. Dialogue was
Hmm.
unhearable. And it was more that he said, like, this is how this would sound in real life. Like he has really fought against his detractors about the audio in his films. He has said, like, this is an intentional choice. I'm aware that I could do it differently. I'm not going to. And, and so it's interesting that he, I don't want to say took that criticism in and did it differently this time.
Mhm.
I don't know that that is why, because again, he's been very adamant about the way that he uses sound purposefully. But I do feel like this was one that you hung on every word. You didn't miss a minute. And it was also, to your point, there is a score going on in the background. And he hasn't always historically mixed those this way, evenly this way. There is a very significant balance here where you can hear the music, but you can hear the dialogue as well. And that's not very typical of his work. I think it's worth taking a look at. But the other point you made of that scene where he's giving the speech, that again, I can't think of almost any other word to describe it other than visceral, because I
Mhm.
think you can feel in that moment, or as close as you possibly can as a viewer of this moment. I feel like you can feel what he must have been feeling. And I think that's such a testament to the filmmaking. That is such a powerful skill to be able to transport you, to make you feel that anxiety, that utter guilt, the burden of everything that he's dealing with. And like, you can just truly imagine being this person trying to give this speech and trying to breathe and trying to not see the room shake and the people's faces melt and
Mhm.
feel the pressure and the sweat and the burden of everything that has just happened. And I just think he captures that so incredibly. It's almost indescribable how well that is done, I think, both from a filmmaking perspective on the part of Nolan, but also, of course, Cillian Murphy's performance in that scene
Mhm.
is just
Yeah.
bar
The
none.
the the visuals in this are incredible. I think that's as I said, that goes along with just the pacing of this. There's so many cutaways to just random, explosions or things like different things happening and what he's sort of envisioning in his head, Oppenheimer. And it drives the film. It's really interesting. I do want to transition a little bit though. I'm curious to get your take on sort of the women in Oppenheimer's life, the two specific ones that we meet here,
Mhm.
because I think the first time through, I didn't follow that story as well as I wanted to, or maybe I didn't give them enough credit for how much they do drive the story forward. And then on this rewatch, I really took in the performances and found a better appreciation of how much they play into his development as a person and how the story ultimately plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of struggle with that in this movie, to be honest, because I don't think that they're truly done a lot of justice in this
Mm.
film as far as being credited with being the people they were in his life. And you could definitely make the argument that Nolan is making that a purposeful choice, right? Again, we're so almost tunnel visioned into Oppenheimer's experience and his lens and his view, and that maybe that's intentional for a reason. But I also think that these people obviously had a major impact on him. For example, with Jean Tatlock, they do handle that moment in a really profound way of when she, trigger warning, discussion of suicide, but she decides that to take her own life, and you see that she is a very unstable character, right? And that was true for her. So I would say that's not a
Hmm.
trope. I will give Nolan credit. Like, he's not just making the women in the movie crazy, which we
Yeah.
see happen all too often. She really was mentally had a lot of challenges and had some instability there. So, and she does do this. She does kill herself this way. And I think the other more impactful moment of that is it really does affect Oppenheimer this way. We don't know for sure that this is exactly the scene, right? The scene between him and Kitty, him running off into riding his horse off into the woods and having this breakdown. I don't know that we know that that explicitly happened that way, but we do know that it had a profound impact on him as a person.
Well, speaking of things that we don't know if they happen or not, were you aware of like the conspicuous circumstances potentially behind her death, Jean?
Yeah, I was sort of vaguely aware that there's some, yeah, conspiracy theories
Yeah.
around that.
When I was watching this the second time too, the concept of somebody taking sleeping pills and simultaneously drowning themselves in a tub, I was
Mhm.
very confused by that decision. Just from a logical, I guess, perspective. Of I didn't know if you could actually do that or not, like if it would be physical. But then I went online and sort of was looking into it, and there were based on all the sort of political drama that's going on in this of communism and socialism and blah blah blah. And obviously this is during the McCarthy era, and it's very
Mhm.
scary for people to speak their political beliefs. There are some folks who think that she didn't kill herself, that she
Right.
was killed for sort of being a part of these parties. And I didn't see this on rewatch, so feel free to fact check me, all. But in facts online, they say that we see multiple takes of her, you know, dying in the tub essentially. And apparently in one of the shots there is a gloved hand pushing her head down into the water. So it's kind of giving you these multiple versions of how this could have happened, which I thought was, again, from a historical context when we don't know exactly what happened, interesting to put that in there too.
I think it's an interesting take for sure. And I did also read about that. And I understand why people think that. I also think it can be explained by once you've she had tried before, for context, historically. Jean
Mm,
Tatlock, the person, had truly tried to take her own life previously, and it didn't work. And I think once you make that choice, truly make that choice as a person, you want to make sure that it works, you know? So I think that she was just really truly committing to, like, this is not going to be an accident this time that doesn't work out, right? And that's my take on it, not because I don't think that things like that happen. Like, I think that it's entirely possible.
yeah.
But I also just think that we don't know. We just don't
Yeah.
know the answer to that. And I don't, but I do think it's interesting that in the art form, it leaves it open to interpretation. And I like that, because I think that Nolan does that a lot in a lot of his films, right? He lets you decide, think about the end of Inception, right? He kind of lets you decide where you think
Hmm.
this is going. What do you think really happened? And I think it's a really interesting choice for sure.
Yeah, this is a bummer of an episode. Sorry, y'all.
It really is sad.
Because literally, I think 3 or 4 days ago, I don't know how I was on Reddit and went down like a rabbit hole, and I don't even know how I got to this, but they were talking about folks who had jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge, since that's like one of the places where
Hmm.
typically people in that area, it's somewhere that people find it, I guess, most convenient or most tempting if you're trying to off yourself. And how many of the folks that survive the fall eventually say, hey, that was my biggest regret. Like, I realized on the way down how little all my other problems, I'm so glad that I survived. But there is one woman, and there's multiple cases of people who didn't work the first time. One woman went back and did it again, like years
Mm.
later. So to your
Hmm.
point of like, she had already tried this. I'm in agreement with you just based on it. Is some people, depression is crazy. These different mental illnesses are crazy, and yeah, sometimes people just want out no matter what.
Right. They make you do things that don't make sense externally, you know? But I think I mean, back to your point about the one, it is a super bummer episode, but one of the things I think is true of the women in this film is that their performances are incredible and their
Hmm.
position in his life is really critical. But I also think it's a fair criticism of Nolan in general to say that his films are a little bit of a bro club. A lot of them are centered around male stories, male lenses, and don't
Hmm.
often bring in a lot of female support and female viewpoints. So I think that stays true here, with one notable exception of Kitty. And I think, played by Emily Blunt again, she has this really powerful scene where she's being interrogated by this
Hmm.
attorney, again played by Jason Clark, where they're really really trying to make that communist connection, because as we know, that
Yeah.
was all the ammunition you needed back then to just ruin somebody's life. And so he is trying to go toe to toe with what he perceives to be just a housewife, right?
Hmm.
He thinks she's just a housewife. She's not anything special. She's not an intellectual. She's not the person making the bomb. So she couldn't possibly be all that smart. And I think what you see in this scene executed so beautifully is that she can hold her own here, and
Yeah.
not only hold her own, if not take the win, right? Like, she is just as smart as her husband in different ways. She is
Hmm.
just as valuable a person. She is shown to be this truly powerful individual in this moment, and she is not going to let this guy fuck around with her. And I love that moment. I love that performance. I love that for women in his films. This was needed, I think.
Yeah, I think that seeing her in her first couple of scenes, my first thing that I wrote down was like, God damn, any woman named Kitty just loves to party. You know she loves to party. 'Cause she just the first couple scenes, she's just going hard. And then there's the scene where he comes home to her and the baby's crying and she's trying to be affectionate and he asks why she's not taking care of the kid. Once
Right.
again, reminding us that babies are terrible. But aside from that, seeing her in the early scenes, you think that she is sort of this a mess in some ways, like
Mhm.
a to your like about tropes of just it's
Mhm.
this, mess of a wife who like isn't taking care of the kid and her husband's neglecting her and blah blah blah. But to see her develop and to harden to the world and to see her push back on not only Oppenheimer but also on the lawyers and the other folks involved and giving him some shit of like why are you so content to be the martyr in this situation? Why are you letting them walk all over you? Why did you
Mhm.
shake this guy's hand who just betrayed you? So when
Mhm.
she finally gets that chance to shine there and just walks all over, just undresses him up and down, it's fantastic to see. And it's a very like, if we're bringing it back, a very you go girl kind of moment. I think we can bring that back. So
We can bring that back. For Kitty, we can do anything. Yeah, she does an incredible job, and I agree with you. I think I would one thing I would add on to what you said though was, the trope of the mom who's a mess or whatever, and she's partying hard at the beginning there. I think what you're seeing, to be honest, is a woman beholden to society's expectations that she procreate and
mm,
be a mother. And
yeah,
I don't think she wanted to, right? I think that's what
right,
we're trying to say here, right? Is she did her duty, the thing that she had to do, but she wasn't she wouldn't have probably been a mother if she had been born in a different era that didn't expect that of her, right? I think
right,
she has more quote unquote important things to do with her life from her perspective, I believe, than to raise a baby. And I think that's a perfectly valid viewpoint. And it's something that women in certain eras were not given the autonomy really to do. You were unfulfilled. You had no value as a person if you didn't check this box, right? And I think that that's what they're showing here. They're showing this woman who doesn't want to do this thing that she was expected to do. And yeah, like I said, I like that you see her grow and you harden and get to this moment of standing fully in herself at the end. I
yeah.
love that for her.
She I like the way you put that. I like that she's not just defending her husband, she's defending their family, their existence, the things that they've been through, the decisions they've made. And I think that seeing shortly before that uncomfortable moment where Oppenheimer is figuratively and literally undressed in that scene where he's being interrogated, and it does that shot is incredible where it sort of pans around and suddenly he's undressed as he was when he was having his affair. And it's cutting
Mhm.
back and forth between the romantic scenes with his
With
girlfriend,
Jean, yeah.
and then coming back to this and seeing the reaction from Kitty in that moment
Mhm.
where the Florence Pugh's character appears there, they're having sex in front of her, they make eye contact. It's you see how uncomfortable she is with having to hear this line of questioning. So again, it is so nice when she gets a chance to sort of give them some comeuppance.
And she does it in spite of what is clearly this betrayal she was unaware of, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
she knew that they had a relationship to some degree, and she definitely knew about the relationship predating her, but she didn't know that it overlapped her. And this is her seeing that in real time, and she walks out of the room. And it leaves hanging in the air the question of, is she going to defend him later, or is she gonna let him
Mm-hmm.
be humiliated by this panel? And she does it, to your point, as much for him as she does it for her. She doesn't let them do that to him, at least not in that way. His security clearance, spoiler alert, does get pulled. He loses his influence and he loses this hearing. But I mean, you can see from the get-go it's a farce. So she knows that probably deep down as well, and she doesn't let that stop her from saying what
Mm-hmm.
needs to be said on their behalf. Yeah, so I think it's a very worthy moment in the film, and it's one of the ones not of levity but of hope. And there are not many in this movie, despite how great it is. There's just not many.
Right, right. I think moving on, I don't have much more in my notes if I'm being honest. I think there's a couple smaller conversations. I wonder if in the scientific community, like students at sort of like these prestigious schools, and also shout out to Princeton. I used to live like 5 minutes from there. So some of this was actually filmed there on site.
Hmm.
But I wonder if some folks in the scientific community, if all these different characters that were, if it's like, oh shit, like I feel like it's me watching Iron Claw and seeing all these wrestlers from the 80s. I'm like, oh shit,
Yeah.
it's Ric Flair, it's Harley Race. If they're like, oh shit, it's Borgman, oh, it's this guy, like just marking out for like all these different characters from history. But outside of that, I think the only other thing that I really wanted to mention was the theme of importance throughout this, because the word itself, and I didn't pick up on this until the second time again, but the word important comes up 5 or 6 times during this. And you kind of have these two characters of Oppenheimer and Strauss competing with each other, and it seems like Oppenheimer could give what's the quote where, if it were Strauss saying, I feel sorry for you. Oh, it's from Mad Men. But
Mm,
like I feel sorry for you when I think about you. Oppenheimer, I feel like would be like, well, I don't think about you at all. He
right.
doesn't give two shits about Strauss. Meanwhile,
Right.
Strauss seems to have this chip on his shoulder and is constantly trying to outdo and impress the scientific community. He gets, sort of shrugged off by Einstein, tries to talk to him. There's these lines of, oh, you were a lowly shoe salesman. And he says, I was just a shoe salesman. And then later in the film, he refers to himself of like, I'm not going back to being a lowly shoe salesman. So there's this just air of self-importance versus being actually important, which again is directly pulled from the film. And I found that pretty fascinating this time through.
I think that's such a huge thing to point out here is that he did have these really humble beginnings, but he needs the scientific community, and I think you see this in the film to your point, to be aware of his natural intelligence and that
Mm-hmm.
he could have been like them. And I think that's where you see this chip on the shoulder because he actually was accepted, to I think it's Princeton actually, I can't remember, but he was accepted into a program for physics. He was actually really quite obsessed with physics in his childhood. He devoured books on physics and engineering and all these things. He was actually a really intelligent guy, but he became a quote unquote shoe salesman because that was his father's business and it was floundering and it was going to leave them without a way to survive, is what it came down to.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so he had to forego his later education to help his family. And I think you see in this film, although they don't explain it, the chip on his shoulder and the resentment that stems from that of like, I
Right.
could have been an Oppenheimer. I could have been an Einstein. I could have been a Heisenberg if I had been able to go pursue the education that I wanted to. And I think he finds avenues for influence a very backwards way so that he can still, to your point, feel important and be important. But it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't how he originally wanted to do it, I think is the crux of the matter. And so you see that play out here between them and their relationship for sure.
Yeah, you see how he develops into a pretty damn good politician instead of a
Hmm.
scientist. And he's
Yeah.
playing this sort of backdoor game of fucking people over and trying to get his way and anything he can get over the head of the people that he sees himself as competition with, when really he's not even in their league when it comes to the entire community of scientists
Hmm.
thinks he's a fucking ass.
Yeah.
So yeah, I dug that a lot. I think it's also, there's reference to even Einstein. After a while, it's crazy to think about the fact that they say, oh, he was the best scientist of his time, but it's been 40 years since he wrote that. And
Right.
I think Einstein sort of owns that and says he kind of went through the same thing of, I was scared of what I had unearthed, and you're
Hmm.
eventually going to feel this same sort of struggle. And I think that's
Hmm.
that's interesting to think about, that Einstein had a decline from
Right. Because
his
you
the
don't
things
think
that we
about
know him
any of
for.
these people. Yeah, you don't think of any of these people as having a decline. You don't think of an
Hmm.
Oppenheimer even. I mean, we again, we even if you vaguely know the history, like you don't think of him having had a decline. He did this incredible, if not terrifying, but incredible thing. He achieved this incredible thing and you just don't think about that. And I love that, you know, you see that conversation with him and Einstein where Einstein, to your point, warns him like, I've been through this with you before and what's going to happen
Hmm.
is they're going to punish you for a long time. And when they feel they've punished you enough, they're going to give you an award. But that award will be about them rewarding themselves, giving
Right.
themselves an award. It's not going to be about you, but they're going to give you one later. And it's become, I mean, it's very prescient. He knows exactly what's going to happen because he's been through it, and it turns out to be completely accurate. right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the again what's the book is called The Triumph and Tragedy, right? Like that's the triumph and the tragedy of his life is that he is truly brilliant. He did this incredible thing, but it is a truly tragic thing, and it's something he had to live with for the rest of his life. And I think only people who have been in these same moments can truly understand the weight of that. And I think you see that one last scene I did want to touch on. I think you see that in his interaction with Truman. Truman's the guy who
Mhm.
ultimately gives the order, right? Like he's the president, he's commander in chief. He's the one who says, "Yep, drop these bombs." And, and then we again develop more bombs. He doesn't in this scene acknowledge any of the responsibility of that. He calls Oppenheimer a crybaby, tells him to wipe off the
Yeah.
blood, right?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't feel the same sense of responsibility. And I think it's a stark contrast
I
of
don't
these
know that
two
it's that
people.
he doesn't feel the responsibility. I think it's that he's discompassionate to it. I think he's fine with me. He sees it as a strategic move in war. So like what they would do the same to
Right.
us. So clearly I know I did it. I take credit, but I don't feel guilty for it.
Right. No, I misspoke. You're right. I mean the guilt. He doesn't feel the
Oh, got
guilt.
it.
He
Yes.
doesn't feel the guilt of that decision. He feels, yeah, he feels justified in that decision. I agree. But I think it says like if you are incapable of feeling that guilt, I think that
Right.
says a lot about you. And I think it speaks to Oppenheimer's humanity that he does. And it weighs on him for the rest of his life. But all that to say, I think that this gets all these incredibly difficult themes across in this whole
Mhm.
film. And while you are really, it's heavy and you feel the heaviness of it leaving the theater, somehow you don't feel just straight up depressed. There's
Yeah.
there's a real art to how he put this story together in a way that you don't leave just completely deflated, you know?
Yeah.
It feels like you just witnessed yeah, a real piece of art, you know.
I wanted to touch on that. I'm glad you said that because it's not a happy ending. It's this really, especially the final 30 seconds or so, where it's just you're looking at the possibilities of what this invention could eventually cause. So it's hard to walk out of this not feeling a bit uneasy, but at the same time, it's this. I'm not going to use the word, like, it's hard to come up with a better word than like a triumph of what this group of geniuses did together in this short amount of time. And it's a bummer how it ends up playing out on their consciences. But to
And
the
some,
point
not all
earlier,
though.
yeah, that's true. That's very true. And I mean, I read that, and this is not going to put any happier spin, but apparently Oppenheimer's security clearance was posthumously reinstated a few
I
years ago,
know.
and they're
Like
like,
really
okay, we were
ridiculous.
wrong because we know a movie's coming out. Like, fuck off.
But
But
also, like, what functional need did that fucking serve? He
right,
didn't have
right.
access to things in his lifetime, which is what security clearance is for. Like, I don't,
Hmm.
it's so stupid. It's so stupid.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. But yeah, so I mean, we could go on and on about this one, I think, but I actually think the fact that we can talk about this 3-hour film for about an hour is pretty much speaks to it doesn't feel bloated. It doesn't again, the pace and the way that it's structured make it pretty easy to follow. You can pick up on all these themes, you know who the characters are, you know what you're
Hmm.
excited about, you know what you're sad about, and you know what the major takeaways are. So the fact that it's wrapped up in that neat package and we can get through it in an hour, I think speaks to just how good this film is.
Yeah, I think it's a masterclass in filmmaking, honestly,
Mhm.
and it's really again a heavy but enjoyable watch, and that is a dichotomy that is very hard to achieve, right? And I think it says a lot as well that you would be willing to go back and watch it, which I don't think everyone will be, right? Like it's different
Right.
strokes for different folks. But for me, I would be willing to watch this again. You know what I mean? It's just so powerfully done and well done that even though it is hard and it is heavy, it it's it's masterful filmmaking is undeniable. So definitely worthy of a watch again. Double tapping on those super high ratings,
Mhm.
8.5, 9. But
Yeah.
to your point, especially as part of the Academy, it's a 10 out of 10 film. I agree.
Yes, yeah. Again, that 9 rating of mine is on a purely personal level. I give 10s to the movies I know I can rewatch and rewatch and rewatch.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Mhm. Well, thanks for hanging with us for this one because we know it was a heavy one for sure.
Thank God we're going to
Uh,
lighten things up next week.
yeah, so light with come back and listen to our best director selection, which is Killers of the Flower Moon. And I
I
also
mean, in
want
a
to
way,
say
it's their fault.
I was
They
literally
voted.
about to say, you took the words out of my mouth. You guys, it's your
Sorry.
fault. What did you think was going to happen? You nominated these incredibly heavy movies. But yeah, actually, to that point, we have our last poll going on for the final selection, which will be the best picture option. It's between American Fiction and Barbie. So we'll let you know next week what it turns out to be. It's going to be
Yeah,
one of
I'm
those.
fingers crossed it's Barbie, not because I don't want to watch American Fiction, but I'm gonna need something lighter. And I mean, Barbie is heavy in its own way, but
It
I
is.
need to laugh a little bit more
Yeah.
in the next one that
Yeah.
I watch.
American Fiction is also funny just to make
Okay,
everybody feel
okay.
better. It is also light. I think I'm glad that we are down to 2 light options. But I will
Hmm.
say if we don't get to talk about Barbie for this one, I'm gonna be real upset about it. Not gonna lie. And I love both of these movies, by the way. So that's saying something. Anyway, but for now, go have a drink and watch a thing. Cheers.
Cheers.